Right, we're off.
All right.
What are we doing here?
I don't know, part four. When we first talked about this, we were like, oh yeah, let's get on for an hour and we'll mess around and then we'll be done. Then we're like, well, let's record it. And now here we are. I don't know, 5 hours later, we're still going. Right. So I watched the end of the last video to sort of remind myself what we were up to. And it's been a week. I have no idea. You'll have to tell me. But I think what we did in the last time is we finished Octokit GitHub. And of course, what we're doing here is your little tool for automatically moving people between GitHub teams for the Cucumber project. Um, and Octokit GitHub is your gateway slash infrastructure wrapper slash adapter for talking to GitHub. And we made it nullable. Does that sound right to you? Does all
No,
that
it
ring a
does
bell?
sound right. And we did it and we sort of redid it because we'd done it once, but not. And then you had some second thoughts about that.
Yeah, it was
Um,
the nullable configuration that we ended up doing last time. Is we got it, we sort of had a placeholder configuration, and then when we started looking
yeah.
at, well, how are we going to actually use this, we realized that it needed to be different.
So I think when you say we finished Octokit GitHub, I think the thing that we haven't done yet, when I look at the code, I don't know if you're following me, I can force you
I
to,
am. Mhm.
is we still have Uh, so there's sort of like two sides to the conversion to TypeScript because when we first sketched this out, we just used any types everywhere,
Mhm.
and we've now got full typing on all the nullable configuration stuff, but we haven't got full typing on the actual around the actual use of Octokit, the thing that
Right.
we're nulling. So that's one thing that's still to do.
Mhm.
Um, And then the other thing that's still to do is making this config work in a Cucumber context where we're sort of building up this picture of what the configuration needs to be over several steps that are separate functions the way Cucumber works. So we'll have like two or three given steps that will need to build up the shape of the configuration and then we're going to use it, which is sort of different to how you've used it, where you use it all in one test and you'll just be able to create it in one go.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, often with some helper setup methods and so forth,
Mm.
but yeah, that's absolutely right. So at the end of the last video, we said, sorry, um, we said that we were going to work on the test, but if I'm kind of inclined to continue with Octokit GitHub because I'd like to get it like truly properly done. So we can say this is an example not only of how does the nullable infrastructure wrappers work, but how does it work when you've got a static typing, right? People often ask me because I use JavaScript for a lot of my
Yeah.
examples. They say, well, how do you do this in a statically typed environment?
Yeah, and I was particularly interested in that as well around like the I think when I kind of initially got in touch with you, the thing that I'd struggled with when I tried to do it on my own was so there's that saying about don't mock types you don't own. And
Right.
I know we're not mocking here, but
Hmm.
I still had a sort of, because of that background I had a reaction to putting in a fake around the type that we don't own, the Octokit type, because it's kind of complicated and hairy and does loads of stuff that we don't need it to do, and it scared me a bit to be
Hmm.
investing in doing that. So you having the confidence of going, no, that is how we do this. It's helpful, but we sort of, yeah, it'd be good to explore that. So I'm happy to do that first. I think it's a fork in the road, isn't it? We just need to pick one
Yeah,
and
well,
do
let's
it.
stick with Octokit GitHub. I think for the people
Yeah,
watching, it will be nice to sort of stay on the same track before we move
yeah,
on. Um, you mentioned, the advice with mocking, of course, is don't mock, never mock something you don't own. With nullables, it is what I'm doing with a nullable is a kind of test double, but it's not the advice that you hear around mocks and fakes does not apply because with nullables it's not a mock or a fake, it's a stub specifically, meaning that it's, at least my understanding of stub is that it's something that mimics the interface, but only returns empty values or pre-configured values.
Yeah, and I think the difference I've always thought between certainly between a mock and a stub is that a mock might make a sort of an assertion, like it might fail if you don't treat it in a way that it's expecting to. Like it's capable of being assertive about how you ought to work with it, whereas a stub is more passive. A stub's just you set it up and then it passively pretends to be the thing that you've told it to pretend to be in whatever way you've told it to behave, but it doesn't make any assertions. It doesn't sort of stick its hand up and go, "Oh, hold on a minute, that didn't seem right." Unless obviously you break its you break its interface and try and call a method it doesn't have or something, but it's not gonna make any assertions for you.
Yeah. I mean, the four types of test doubles I'm aware of are mocks, spies, stubs, and fakes. And I think of all of those, stubs are the very simplest, and that's
Yeah.
why I chose them, as
What's a
I wanted something
fake?
really simple.
I know what a spy is.
A spy is
What's a
just a
fake?
mock that doesn't do assertions. Um,
Yeah, well, a spy would tell you afterwards, right? So you could make assertions afterwards, whereas a mock you have to pre-configure it. But what's a fake?
so well, this is let me tell you how I think of it, and then
Yeah,
you can tell me what you think of it. Um, so a stub is the sort of the most basic. A stub is, and Martin Fowler has this famous article, "Mocks aren't spies" or "Mocks aren't
yeah,
stubs," which people can look up.
yeah.
But a stub is imitates an interface and just does nothing or returns a pre-configured value. A mock is a stub that also has the ability to assert that methods were called in a particular way. A spy is a stub that has the ability to report how methods were called. And a fake, so stubs, mocks, and spies are all sort of variants. Fakes are entirely different. Fake is something that implements the interface and attempts to simulate the behavior of the thing that is being replaced.
Okay. So where I'd built I actually named it correctly, the fake GitHub.
Yeah.
That is an in-memory simulation of the behavior of the real GitHub.
Yeah. And if you
Yeah,
were to
right.
scroll down on the Octokit GitHub down to our null GitHub,
Null Octokit.
null
Yeah,
Octokit, there it is. Yeah. Um, that is very much a stub because it's just returning hard-coded values. If it was a fake, when we would have the ability, for example, add or update membership for user in org on line 100, that would put something in memory. That would make it a fake. But because it doesn't, it's just a stub.
yeah, yeah. Okay. So I think about stubs and fakes as being the same thing, but I can see how there's a distinction.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and honestly, I feel like the excessive sort of taxonomy people put around things is kind of intellectual wanking. but but sometimes I think it's helpful to know the difference.
yeah.
Um, but I don't make a lot of distinctions. But what I was getting at with that is that the null octokit, what you do with nullable infrastructure wrappers is very much stubs, the very simplest kind of test double. And the rule with nullable infrastructure wrappers is you only ever stub the things that you don't own. You never stub something that you do own.
Right. So it's the
So it's
opposite
very different.
advice.
Yeah, it's
It's the
exactly
opposite
the opposite.
advice. Yeah.
Yeah,
Only null things you don't own.
that's right. And with
Yeah.
mocks, what you're trying to do is test the interaction. You're saying, or mocks and spies, they're basically equivalent. I called this thing in this way. Whereas with the nullable infrastructure wrappers, it's state-based testing rather than interaction-based testing. I called this thing and this happened, not, and I don't know what it did, and I don't care. I only care what the
Mm,
outcome was that was externally visible. But that does require, as you've seen, like with track changes on line 89, there are some things that we have to make visible. Otherwise, um, we can't test it using the nullable infrastructure wrappers.
yeah.
And some people, as I'm sure you know, some people call this the Chicago School of Testing versus the London School of Testing, or the mockist or the classicist versus the mockist. And I like state-based versus interaction-based. Um, and I have a strong bias towards state-based testing because I feel like it allows you to do tests that are more real and allows you to do tests that are sociable, that call
Yeah.
through to their dependencies, which means that if the dependencies don't behave the way you expected them to, then your test will break.
Yeah. Is it that sort of distinctions? I don't know how much we want to get into this. This is like beer chat, but that distinction's always bothered me a bit in that, like, it implies that you're only going to do, you people are either from the London school or from the Chicago school, whereas I think they're both tools that are useful. So I like you can see from the way the cucumber test was set up when we first walked into this code base that like state-based testing using that fake is definitely how I like to use acceptance tests.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I have found when there are particular bits of uh, like finer grained unit test stuff that I've been designing, that thinking about the way the objects talk to each other and using mocks to help design that has been really helpful for me.
Yeah.
Um, and I've made, we could walk through code someday, made designs that I am delighted with, and I'm pretty sure that using that design tool helped to facilitate that. Because he's sort of like, I think that school comes from like Steve and Nat was small,
Mm-hmm.
or at least Steve was a small talker originally, and there's so much emphasis in small talk about messages and thinking
Yeah.
about how objects talk to each other, and I think it's a helpful tool in a particular context. But I think when everybody thinks black and white about, like, either I use mocks for everything, or either I never use mock or I never use mocks, is sort of a bit limited to be thinking like that.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, the people call them like opposing schools, and they
Yeah.
are different ways of doing it, but they can coexist in the same code
Right.
base.
Yeah.
It's actually possible to take a code base that's been done entirely with mocks, to put in the nullable infrastructure wrappers, and then you can actually have mocks and nullable infrastructures in the exact same test. I don't, were you at my workshop at Agile? I don't
Yeah.
recall.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so one of the things we did there is we actually moved from mock-based tests
Yeah.
to the
Yeah.
nullable infrastructure wrapper tests,
Yeah.
one line at a time. And you,
Yeah.
of course, could go back the other direction too. I
Yeah.
had Mike Hill and Joe Rainsberger on my Art of Agile Development book club show, which for listeners can be found at jamesshore.com/s/AOAD2 book club. And if you scroll down to the test driven development link, you'll find it. It's also on my YouTube. Anyway, so we got to talking about mocks versus classicist versus mockist and state-based versus interaction-based testing. And they were basically saying the same thing. It's not an either or, it's a tool, use the one that you want. But they also said something I thought was really insightful, which is that um, the interaction-based testing is more of an object-oriented mindset, and the state-based testing is more of a functional mindset, and not necessarily or imperative.
Mm.
Not necessarily purely functional in the functional programming sense. But I thought that made a lot of
More of
sense.
like
It's sort of like, how
procedural.
are you
Yeah.
approaching your design? Are you approaching it from an OO perspective, or are you approaching it more from a calling functions perspective?
Yeah. Right. Should we do some stuff?
Yeah, yeah. Let's stop
It's enough
bloviating.
philosophizing. So I'm wondering where to start with this, because I have rehearsed this a couple of weeks ago now, so I'm a little bit rusty.
Yeah.
And I'm
So
thinking it makes sense if you drive.
yeah, that was my thinking too, because I'm not super familiar with Typekit. I've had a lot of experience with statically typed languages, of course, or not
Yeah.
Typekit, but TypeScript. Um, and so if I drive, I can ask you sort of the ignorant questions, and then you can guide me through it. Does that
Yeah. So
that
I
sound
think
good
it
to you?
does work. So I think what we should probably start with is now. One thing I want to check is, have we got a constructor? We must have, that's calling this with a real instance of Octokit. There must be one somewhere. I just
Yeah,
want
I
to make
think the way we did
sure.
this is we kind of broke the code, and I don't know if there's anything real
Find
happening right now.
references. So in index.ts, we are calling it with a real Octokit. So the compiler will tell us if we break things. So that's good. So what I suggest we do, what we start by doing is on line 34, replace the any
Hmm.
with a capital O Octokit.
Okay. Well, I don't want to just, type. So let me understand what's
Yeah.
going on here. So when you say a capital O Octokit, do we have that type defined anywhere?
No, and we could do that first. And I think we should just make it be any, but we'll just move it away from here. So that's our first little move. So you could do
Okay,
it, you could maybe define it up on line 24.
sure.
Um, so just say type Octokit equals any, and then use that type instead of the any on line 36.
Okay. So now we're defining a type of Octokit.
Yeah.
And now how do I know that the compile is working?
Right. So you can explicitly run npm run build in
But it should
the
show up in VS
terminal.
Code, right?
Well, so I see 5 problems in my problems view. Do you see that?
Uh, yeah, I do. I just needed to open up the tab.
One of them is that you've got that semicolon habit, which prettier and ESLint are configured not to like. If I save, it'll clean the code. I've got my VS Code configured to run that automatically on save.
But what mine won't.
Well, I think it's something you have to set up. So this is another difference between WebStorm and VS Code is the experience you get in your editor is all of your own plugins.
Hmm.
So whatever keyboard shortcuts and stuff you have are all at your end, and that includes things like reformatting on save.
Yeah.
But you could use Command Shift P and then type format,
Hmm.
and it should get format document, and it should do something sensible. You might need to install a prettier plugin for it to work. Do you want to try it? I'll
Yeah,
put a
let me try it.
semicolon in there.
Okay. So for me, it looks like, so Command Shift P format is Shift Option F is the auto format. Yep, that's doing it.
Great.
Okay, so what does this mean? Unexpected any?
Well, so we've got an ESLint rule, which is just warning us that any's a bad idea to use. So these are like little indicators that
Oh,
we can
okay.
use to ease this out.
So we're
Um,
still good then.
yeah,
But if I were to change this to say date, then yeah,
yeah,
now I'm seeing all kinds of errors showing up in the problems
yeah.
window
But what
because
we
of
could
course it's
do
not
is we could
compatible.
start thinking about what it does have. So it is an object that has a rest property because we're going to call this.octokit.rest a lot. So you could try changing it to being an object that has a rest property that is any.
So hold on one second. If yeah, if what if I'm going to do something a little crazy here. This is what you get for letting me drive. I'm going to copy I'm going to copy our existing stub, our nullable implementation, um, and I'm going to say that that's our type because that's what our type needs to support, right? Um, so,
Yeah. Yeah, that is right.
and I'll just
Um,
start deleting stuff. And
yeah.
so we're going to have a rest
I would
uh,
change it to being get to just be, yeah, rest colon. Yeah.
colon, um, and then all the implementation of that I don't
So
need.
teams you do want, right? So to get rid of the return,
Okay, so the
yeah,
rest is going to be an object that has teams.
yeah.
All right. Let's see. What's the quick key for delete a line?
It depends on you. For me, it's DD because I've got Vim shortcuts, but
Oh yeah, I don't have that set up.
just hold
Okay,
down
well I guess I'll
Shift
just
and down, and
okay. So teams, and then teams is going to be a thing.
it has these functions. That's all good.
Yeah.
But we need to get rid of the body of list members in org. So
So
just
that takes a team
that's all
slug.
good. We can leave that.
Yeah.
But the right hand side we're going to need to define. But just make just to empty out the implementation of the method for now.
Yeah. And that, but
You
that
still need an
returns a null members list. So that
yeah,
would be an Octokit member list, right?
exactly, yeah.
Am I doing this right?
Yeah, I mean, I would start with any right now because we want to try and get back to green on the compiler as soon as possible. So, but that's where we're headed. Yes.
So I'm just gonna
But it's not a colon there, it's an arrow because you're talking about the return type.
Like that?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then here you could, yeah, that's great.
Okay, and then this,
Same pattern here.
yeah.
Keep the arguments, but get rid of the body of the method. And okay, so let's sort out the bracketing. There's a couple of superfluous curlies, it looks like. Did you want to delete that? Did that come up in a copy paste?
Did what come up in
The
the copy
null
paste?
repo list. Did that?
Oh, I copied it
Yeah.
over.
All
Yeah,
right. Okay. Yeah.
yeah. But
So what's that last? Why is that last one red? Did it not expect that one on line 40 either? I think it's got enough closing curly braces. You can get rid of that one and then do a reformat.
oh yeah.
Okay. So I think we still need any's on the right hand side here rather than these method bodies on 28 and 29.
Right. Actually, that should just be null, or how do you say that
Void.
it doesn't,
So
what'd you
you can
say?
say promise of void. That's what you want to do. So promise is a generic. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So we still have a whole bunch of stuff. Null octokit is not assignable. So now we have to say that null octokit is an octokit, right?
Hang on, I'm not following you. Where are we now?
I'm looking at the problems. So our first problem is
Okay.
argument of null octokit
Type.
is not assignable to primitive type octokit. So if
Why
I
is
go
that?
down to
Why
null
is that?
octokit,
Type void is not assignable to type promise void. So the reason is that we have lazily just returned void in our null, and we need to make sure that that method is async.
right?
So our null type is not quite right.
Where are you talking? Which line are you talking about?
I'm not sure. The problem view is just showing us. Can you see the whole? If you read all the way down the error message at the bottom, it says type void is not assignable to type promise of void. Maybe if you hover over, no, it doesn't
It
tell us
looks like
where.
it's line
Oh
69 that
yeah,
it's
there we go.
pointing at.
REST teams add or update membership for user in org. So
Okay, so
where
I'm
we're
just gonna make these
simulating now,
async.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
Wait, that's not the right place to put that keyword. You need to put it on the right
you
hand
are
side of the
correct.
colons.
Yeah, sync and async.
And honestly, you may as well do it for all the others, just while we remember now, because it's not going to do any
Right.
harm. Okay, now
And
expected.
honestly, we should probably have these actually be doing async stuff with set immediate or something like that.
Oh yeah. Shall I write that down?
Yeah, please do.
Okay. So what's wrong now? Expected no arguments but got one. What line is that on?
That is complaining about line 79.
So we haven't told it about because our null doesn't doesn't take any arguments for that. We
Liz.
didn't put any in the
Right,
type,
right.
so we need to go up and fix that.
Yeah, so list, what's it complaining about? List for org. Um, what does that need?
It needs an org, which is a string.
Like
You need
that?
to put that in an object. Yeah, instead of calling out org on the left, you could just call it args or something. Just make a no, but yeah, not inside an object exactly. There you go.
Okay, I'm going to do the same thing here then.
Yeah, right on.
And here.
Then we don't have to repeat ourselves so much.
Yeah.
Right,
Okay.
next problem. Argument of type owner string, repo any, author string, since string is not assignable to. So we haven't called out owner in our stubbed list commits. So we need to add that to the parameters.
Oh, our list commits owners, repo, author, since is what it needs.
So it just needs, I think it's only missing owner though. I think it has the others.
Let me just paste
Or,
this in for memory. So we've got
yeah, author,
author and
since, I
since, but
guess
we don't have owner
repo.
or repo. Owner is a string
Yeah,
and repo is a string.
yeah, I think so. I think that's just a formatting thing now if you reformat. Cool.
Okay. Same
Similar
deal.
issue here. Seems to be missing all of them on that one, I think.
Yeah. But let me just do them one at a time. So we got
So what we're doing here is what Fowler calls leaning on the compiler, right? For the watchers,
yeah,
we're
it's my
just letting
favorite
the
trick when
compiler
working with
tell
statically
us
typed language.
tell us what the Octokit library is insisting that we have as arguments to these functions. So we putting in the
Now,
necessary bits.
something I'm finding interesting about what we're doing here is that we are. Oh, that's interesting. Do we not need commas between our parameters?
In a type, no.
Oh, interesting. Um, so one of the things I'm finding interesting here is that we started with. So you said that when you started doing this, you were running into the problem of, well, you felt like you had to re-implement the entire thing, but by starting with our null as the source of our interface, we're only doing the bare minimum that's needed for our code.
Yeah,
I think if I were to build this from scratch, though, we'd do the actual code first and then do the nullable for part second, right? And I just build the type for the thing that I was implementing and nothing else.
yeah, yeah. And that's I guess is the key is to put this wrapper type in the way in between. Have we is that formatting that's wrong? I think you maybe got an extra round bracket on line 37.
Yeah, you're right.
Okay. There's still a little bit of pretty fuss. There we go. Right. And then the last one here, we're missing org on list members in org.
Org and team slug, right? Is what we need. Yeah.
Yeah, we've already got team slug, but no, the other one, list members in org.
Huh.
Okay, cool. So now it's happy about the shape of the arguments, these functions. What it's whinging about a bit is the return types. And this is where we could do with typing. We've already got a type, right? Which is our null member list, our null repo list, and our null commit list.
Mm-hmm.
So we probably want a common type, and we can say that those classes implement that type to make sure that they're consistent with each other.
Yeah. So it's just an Octokit um, result, isn't it?
Yeah, well, so when I rehearsed this, I ended up with a generic because they've all got a data, and then the data has a different payload shape depending on um, what which one it is. But we can work towards that. So let's just pick one of them, like say the null member list because it's the top of the list, and return instead of an any an Octokit member list. And then we need to type the Octokit member list, and that is going to be a thing that has a data.
And that's a
And
function, right?
no, I think it is just
Oh no, you're
a
right. You're right.
just an object. And then, wait, and data's an array. Sorry.
Actually, I did that wrong. So data is Oh
No,
no, I've
you're
got
already
the
in an
object.
object, yeah. Um,
So
I think
data
data is an
is
array.
an array. How do I signify an array?
Well, we're going to just open close square brackets, but then in front of the square brackets, you have to say what it's an array of. So we want an object, and I think it has a username. Is that right? Let's
Just
scroll down
name,
to
it
the
looks like.
null member list. Where are you getting prompted from that it's name?
Oh, I'm just looking at line 62.
62. Oh, right. Okay, because you
Oh,
grabbed it
except I'm
there.
looking at the wrong thing. I was looking at null repo list, not null member list.
Yeah, so null member list. Yeah, it's got a login.
Yeah,
So we need to remember to return a promise of one of these, not the in the type. So actually on line 41, it needs to be a promise of Octokit member list, not just an
right.
Octokit member list.
Can we do promise any for this other one?
Yeah, I mean, any is a any fits promise of any as well as any. So,
Yeah, I'm just doing
but
it
it's a good reminder.
as a reminder exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's compiling. So I'm going to delete our null member list prompt here. And I'm going to go on and do the same thing for null repo list,
Okay.
if that works for you.
It certainly does. So I think repo. Oh, it's got a name. Okay. Yeah, but you need to make an array on the end of the data.
Okay, yep, this is going pretty smooth. Now I know you wanted to refactor this and eliminate the duplication,
It's not a big deal.
but and I do want to do that. I just want to see this first. Okay, so we'll have commit list.
There's pros and cons actually to doing that anyway. Um, so
We don't know what kind of data null commit list
no,
returns, do we?
we don't care. So what you can say is that it's unknown.
Let me
So you just
just
say it's
double
an array of unknown
let me
because we
just
don't
double
care.
check. That comes back from list commits. And if I search for list, so on list commits,
We just count how many things there are. We don't care what they are.
oh, okay.
So
Yeah.
you can just say it's an array of unknown. The data in this one.
And does unknown mean that if we ever try to do something with it, it will, like, how do we tell it we don't care or we want to be, how do we make it throw an error at us if we try to use something that we say is
By
unknown?
making it on the unknown type.
Okay,
That's how you tell TypeScript that this is a type that nobody should use without doing something to turn it into something more meaningful.
got it. So if we said
It's,
any, people could use it. If we say unknown, it's going to say, wait, you're using an unknown type.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I got to say the power of the TypeScript language is nice compared to some other languages I've used.
They've gone. They've really gone hard on like making it as unverbose. I don't know what the opposite of verbose is. Terse. It's not exactly terse, is it? Because it's expressive, but like the fact that you don't have to use commas, say,
Mm-hmm.
it's just thoughtful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So we still have a few any's. Where are they? I'm seeing
Um,
three. Aha. So
yeah. Now I think what
this
we're doing here
here is
did we put
a.
these innies in or
Yep.
so we put innies in just throughout?
Yeah. So we had to keep TypeScript happy because that we didn't know what that response was. But do you know what one of these is now? What's coming back here?
I'm just pause for a second because it feels like we might be um, repeating work that you already did because you already made a GitHub, did you not, on line 79?
No. So that GitHub there is the one that comes out of Octokit.
Oh, okay.
But we
So
don't need this anymore. We can delete this line.
yeah.
We're not
So
going to come back to doing that.
I guess what I'm a little stuck on, the question I have is when you implemented this originally, what type did you have for Octokit?
That one that you had there in the comment. Now we could have a to make this a bit clearer. We could have a static factory that expect that um, does create an instance of a real Octokit and then calls this constructor. So the Octokit that we've got on line 80 is what you would call in TypeScript a narrowed type. So
Hmm.
we've taken the whole massive, great big Octokit API, which is defined by instance type of GitHub, which is a weird thing for it to
What
be.
does that
But
mean?
um, I don't even really know, James. I spent like a sort of miserable 25 minutes bashing around trying to work out what the type was
Hmm.
for that object, and that was the best I could find. Um, I'm surprised that they don't just export a thing called capital O Octokit, but they didn't seem to, and that seemed to work, and then I just walked away from it.
Got
So
it.
it's a bit of a mouthful because instance type is something that they've defined themselves inside of Octokit. It's I can't yeah I
That's a terrible name. I mean, instance type. What does that even mean?
well
And
it's
won't that have a collision with with other people?
I think we shouldn't go there. But
Yeah.
but for clarity though, we could have another factory, right?
Well,
Because
maybe you can
that
put that on your card.
yeah
I know I'm derailing. So let's go ahead and finish these any's. Also, another thing
yeah
to put on your card is we've got this may be overkill, but we've got orgs and team slugs and usernames all over the place, and I feel like those should have a type as well.
I'm with you. Yeah, I'm with you on that.
And in fact, we
Um,
already have that in a way on line 7, 8, and 8. We have a GitHub team name and a GitHub username. So
yeah. So that's an interesting question, isn't it? It's about how far we let those types go down, because yeah, is that
yeah.
GitHub team name our type? Because we might want to end up using a value object for that in our code,
Hmm.
but here this is GitHub, so this is like Octokit team name,
Mm-hmm.
where that has to be a primitive because that's what they expect on their API. So that's a
It's
debatable
always an
one.
interesting question about, once I start mucking around with types, I find myself like going down the rabbit hole and making a million types. And then I often now typically I'm doing value classes, right? And those are more expensive than the types we're using here. But I'll make a whole bunch of sort of I'm feeling out the domain and then I'll end up deleting them. Like, you know what?
Mm,
This isn't helpful. But I do find that having the type and not needing it is better than not having the type and wanting it later.
totally. Yeah, the work that you have to do to replace a primitive with a value object is much harder
Yeah.
than going the other way around.
Yeah.
Um, but this bit here is interesting. There's two places in my head where we're missing things, and actually I think we should ignore this one for a minute and do something else first
Well,
because
are you talking about the INI on line 85 or are
yeah, I
you
want
talking
to.
about?
There's three of these, and I want to
Mhm.
ignore them. If you
Okay.
scroll right down to the bottom of the page,
All right.
where we've got our null members list and null
Hmm.
repo list and null commit list, what we can also add on here, just to make sure that everything's consistent or it's clear, is say start with null members list.
Hmm.
If you say implements after the name of the class, say implements Octokit member list. I think we didn't
Right.
use plural on that one. And oh, look,
Mm.
interesting. Team members is any there as well. Um,
We'll come back to that.
it's just an array of. Well, we could fix that now. It's an array of GitHub team members, isn't it?
Team names?
GitHub team or GitHub members or team members. I
I
can't
think
remember
it's
what you call them.
username.
Okay. Yeah.
Except it's not, is it? No,
I
this is
think
an
it is
Octokit
because
thing.
we're gonna this is where we construct it from our fake. So this is our
Oh yeah. Yeah. So
configuration.
this is our thing.
Yeah.
Let's leave it as any for now. Let's and come back to it.
All right.
I just want to do one thing at a time.
Yeah, yeah. So do the same with null commits list.
I was surprised we didn't have to do this before. I guess it just knew that it matched.
Yeah, there's nothing saying that we have to do that because we're when we end up using it it'll tell us anyway if we broke the shape.
Right.
But I think it's clearer if we say that at the level of the class. So when you're building it, you see the error right there rather than where you've ended it, where you've used it. You see what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Okay, so now to come back to the thing you were talking about, it's null Octokit team members that we want here,
Yeah.
and
And
that
I
should
think
be an
that's just
array.
something we forgot to do earlier when we were doing it,
Yeah, I think so.
right? So no argument of type string is not assignable. This.config.team members team slug. So did we not set up our config object?
Config is null Octokit config, and config should have a team members, which is a null Octokit team members, and null Octokit team members is a team name, GitHub
Is
team
an
name.
object. So it was, I think we maybe got something different between arrays and objects. Because null Octokit team members is an object. And we've said that we expect to take an array of team members, but I think we don't expect to take an array. So on line 191, we just get rid of the square brackets and just use the type. Oh, except we have to map it. Interesting. So how have we got away with this so far? Because we used the any. What do we want that variable to contain? Is that an array of team members or is it an object?
Null Octokit team members is defined as an object um, with team names in it. And then team members dot, yeah, how are we, whoa, how is that even working?
That's kind of what I was wondering. So actually, team members is a thing where you look up in it. It's an object, and when you look up in it, it gives you back the array.
I'm just, I'm looking at our tests because our tests are passing, are they not?
Yeah,
Are they passing?
I think it's all right. I think what we've not done is we've got a default of an object. Yeah.
So in our test, line 169 allows team members to be configured. We create it. The team is an array. So the definition is wrong. Or we're not understanding something. Octokit team members.
What we should get there is an array of GitHub usernames.
Yeah.
So I don't think that should be team members there. I think that should be all Octokit.
Where are you at?
Down on line 191, I think that the team members is an array of GitHub usernames. Do you want me to? Is the compiler happy with that?
It's not. But also,
It's differently unhappy.
yeah, hold on one second. Hold on one second. So if I look in our tests, and I look at line 169, where we're defining this, we're saying new null Octokit config. And where do we have null Octokit config class defined?
Right at the top of Octokit GitHub.
Oh, there's the class. Okay. So that has team members.
And team members is this thing where you've got, look on line 10 or line 11.
Oh, yeah.
It's
Yeah.
a
Yeah. Yeah.
key of team name, which is an array of usernames. So you can say, here's the committers team and it's got these people in it. Here's the alumni
Right.
team and it's got these people in it.
Right. No,
So
you're
once
right.
we
So down
when
on
we were in that
line,
call where we were looking in the config teams config by key of team name, the thing that we would expect to return there is a GitHub username array.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. So down, you are absolutely correct. Down on line 191, that should be a list of an array of GitHub usernames. And
Yeah.
so that should work, but it's not.
I think this file's happy now. I think actually what's happened is we've opened up the test, and the test is unhappy because of something else that we've done about Octokit, and we haven't seen that because we haven't opened this file before, and the type checker is only looking at the files that we've opened.
You are correct. Yeah, I was just misinterpreting the problems list. Okay, so should we just keep going with Octokit GitHub or should we fix the tests first?
Well, the only thing we've got to do with Octokit GitHub is fixing any's. I'm kind of inclined to take the feedback from the test and fix this more fundamental problem because I'm interested in what it is that's up with it.
Okay, so it's complaining about line 29 in the test, and it's saying that um, not assignable to a parameter of type Octokit. So get
So
Octokit, what is get Octokit returning?
it's returning a real instance of the Octokit library from GitHub.
Okay.
So this is where our factory would help, actually,
Mm-hmm.
because we'd be able to see all of this happening inside the Octokit class, because we'd be actually using the GitHub Octokit type inside our class, so it would all the problems would appear in the same place. So if this, instead of doing a new Octokit and passing it in,
Sorry, I'm
you're going down a
you're
rabbit
going a little
hole.
faster than I can understand. I'm just looking at github.d.ts right now. I'm looking at
Yeah,
the
I can see it.
declaration, and it is saying that get Octokit returns instant type of GitHub.
Yeah, yeah.
And so what we need to do is we need to convert that into an Octokit, correct?
Well, we need to make our Octokit model that type sufficiently, because what they're
Okay.
saying is you're not allowed to bung an Octokit into this hole, a real Octokit into this hole, because it doesn't match.
Okay. And how do we
And
do that?
what? Well, let's have a look at why they're complaining. It says type Octokit is not assignable. Type Octokit response is not assignable to type void. So there's somewhere where we've said that we're going to get a void when actually it does give us a response. It's just we don't care what it is. So we probably need to change in our Octokit where we have those voids for
Mm,
the queries that, or the commands, and we're not interested in the response. We should just change it to unknown rather than void.
got it. Got it. So if I'm in right here, line 32, it's not a promise of type void, it's a unknown.
I think so. And that's just saying, I know it's going to return something, but I don't care what.
Yeah. Yeah. So there we go. That did it.
Yeah. Sweet.
Okay. So let's go back to our innies then. Uh,
Yeah. So this type here is we're mapping over the data. So we don't have a type for this yet. This is the thing that is currently sort of inlined inside of the. This is probably why I factored out a generic response type, because this is
mhm,
the object that's like here,
right.
or rather here, the thing with a
Hmm.
login, the thing with a name, or the thing that's unknown.
Well,
So we could have an Octokit member
let me do the
and
dumb
an
way
Octokit
first.
repo. Yep,
Let me do it the dumb way first, and then we can refactor into a smarter way. So an Octokit repo is um, is an object of type name, which is a string, and the Octokit repo list is an object of type data, which is an Octokit repo array.
exactly. And then you can use that Octokit repo down there where the NE is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's compiling. Let me do the remaining one, and then we can look at the sort of excessively verbose stuff and
Sure.
genericize
Yeah,
it.
yeah. I like going step by step.
Okay, so here in get members of, we're getting a result of a list members in org, which is a what? Is there any way for me to see?
Well, we can say that this is we could call this an Octokit member,
Yeah, Octokit member.
just like we had an Octokit repo.
Yeah, so that's the result of Octokit user member list.
Octokit member list.
Yeah, so say Octokit member array. Okay, it did not like that, probably because I left this
No.
on. There we
Yeah.
go.
Well done.
All right.
So that's got rid of all of the any's, and this class is now happy.
Yeah.
And the
Now
only
do we,
warnings I'm seeing are things in the test about unused. I have a plugin that can get rid of that. 20 days ago is assigned a value but never used. Okay, remember when we were writing that test, we must have created that.
yeah,
Do
I
you see
think
that one?
there was a little bit of sort of thrashing around, so I'll just
Yeah.
delete that.
So what we can do now is if we hit the terminal, we can just run npm run build. We can do that. And that should just give us like a complete compiler. You can also get VS Code to run it continuously, actually. So it
Okay.
would have given us problems about the whole code base rather than just the files that we happen to have open. But it looks like we've done it.
Yeah, well, before we continue on, I'd like to look at this and say, is this overly verbose or are we happy with it?
Mm-hmm.
And that's really a question for you to answer.
So there's that thing I was saying about how we could have an Octokit response generic.
Hmm.
Maybe I can show you what that would look like.
Let me guess. Let me guess, if you don't mind,
Mm-hmm.
because this is a fun opportunity for me to learn more about TypeScript. So we have an Octokit response, um, and that's going to be of type T, and that is going to have a data, which is a T array.
Spot on.
Wow.
It's like you've done this before. So
Well,
now you can change where. So what we could do is say we can still have a type Octokit member list, but it's just equal to an Octokit response of Octokit member.
yeah, I do
And
like that.
then
I
and
feel
then we
like
don't have
that's
to
a
go. Well, it's up to us. So we could inline that type if we wanted, but we've got a couple of places where we're using it, so um, it might be more expressive to just leave it like that.
oops.
Because the generics can start looking pretty gnarly when you throw them around everywhere.
Yeah, and I think we have to be careful about keeping the code readable for people who
Yeah.
don't necessarily have as much experience. Um, is this legal?
Or yep. Something's not though. Where did we? Oh,
And
it's
then I
just
would
it's just formatting.
probably do this, but I'm not sure if your formatter is going to be happy with it. Yeah,
Yeah.
it is.
Maybe put the response just in front of where you start using it.
Yeah. Now, do
Lovely.
you usually keep your types at the top of a file like this? I would tend to sort of put them out of sight down below.
I can't remember how the compiler feels about that. Whether you have to have said them before you use them. I mean, I think in general, I would want to split this file up, and I would want to probably have all of the null stuff in one file and maybe have the Octokit stuff even in another file, and then just the Octokit GitHub is importing those other things. I think
So I don't agree with you about the null implementation.
you
Um,
want to see that in the same file as the real one.
it's extremely tightly coupled to the real implementation. And That's intentional. But when I have tight coupling, I also want tight cohesion. So I want them to be in the same file.
But maybe we could push the Octokit stuff away into another file because it's it's not like we only have that because we have to um, duplicate parts of Octokit's API, so it's not that interesting to have it in this file.
I agree with that. It's also tightly coupled, but the compiler will tell us when we make a mistake, so I'm not so worried about it being less cohesive.
Yeah,
Whereas the nullable infrastructure wrapper and the real thing, you change one, you have to change the other at the same time. Whereas these two are not going to change together as frequently. That's sort of the mental contortions I go through when I'm thinking about coupling and cohesion is if I change this and I also have to change this at the same time, every
yeah,
time they belong in the
yeah,
same file.
yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, why don't
So
you go ahead
there's a
and drive
yeah, okay.
us
Let
to,
me try and do that. So we've got an Octokit up here, and I think I can tell my IDE to um, refactor, move to a new file. So now we've got a file called Octokit, which has that big long type in it, and that's importing these three things: Octokit member list, Octokit repo list, and Octokit commit list. So if I move those and the things that they're made up of, and I'm just going to grab them and move them around. It would be quite nice to define those at the bottom because they're that sort of detail. Let's see if it lets us do that. And I don't need to import anything in this file.
well, we're getting a bunch of problems as a result. It says it can't
But
find those
yeah,
names.
then we just need to fix the imports in this file, I think. Um, so it doesn't know what Octokit repo is. Oh, because I need to export it. Wait a sec. So Octokit repo. So all of these three. I'm not sure actually how many things are going to need exporting here. So we're exporting type Octokit. We know Octokit repo needs exporting. Where's the... So now it should let me import it. There we go. Next problem. Member. Actually, I can see in the problems view, we need member, we need repo list. Okay, and those have all got exports on them already. So now it's going to be just a matter of fixing the imports.
Honestly, don't know that it's an improvement to have this in a separate file. Because
Well, this
nobody else is
file's
ever going to
pretty
refer
long.
to it.
This
Yeah,
file's
there
pretty
is, it is
long.
that. That's true. And I think that's the downside of the statically typed languages is they do tend to be a lot more verbose.
But we can move these things down to the bottom, can't we? Because we probably want to start the story with Octokit GitHub. So we can sort of
Yeah.
unpack the story from the like start with the lead and then
Hmm.
gradually add the details.
Yeah.
So Octokit GitHub is the thing. Although actually, like this whole thing about having a GitHub client, this like we're at a point now where we could rename a lot of stuff and delete a lot of code
Hmm.
because this thing, well, apart from the cucumber tests, this thing is working as we want it to.
Yeah.
So that might help as well in a way to reduce the amount of
Yeah. Let me look around for a moment, if you don't mind.
stuff around. Yeah.
Um, so as I'm looking here, uh, we've got has committed since, which is an author, which is a string. And I wonder if that should in fact be down below in the types. we've got a GitHub team name and a GitHub username. Um,
Mm.
I'm going to pull those back up to the top because I think
We
they're
should
relevant.
definitely be using those. Yeah.
Yeah.
I actually think that those two, I would move them into the um, retiring active contributors file in a way because they're part of the kind of core types of the project. Um, they can definitely stay here for now, but if I think about my ports and adapters pattern, and I need to get my head around your A-frame architecture pattern, but these types here are from in my hexagonal mindset model. These are from the inner hexagon. These are from my core domain, and it's just that this thing needs to know about them so that it can type its interface appropriately. But they're from the middle, so I would move them closer to the middle. I like that you've moved them to the top.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I agree with that. One of the differences between A-frame architecture and hexagonal architecture, I believe, is a lack of dogmatism. Um, and that sort of comes across as saying that hexagonal architecture is dogmatic, which is not what I'm trying to say. But what I mean is that it's about the it's not about what we might be doing in the future, it's about what we have right now. And the fact is that you've got a very simple system that is simply looping over a bunch of names and doing stuff to GitHub. So there is no model, and there may never be a model. So I would leave these here until there was a model, if that makes sense.
Well, yes. Although, if we're going to use them at all, I think that. So, if you follow me for a minute,
Sure.
this here, right, where we see get members of,
Mm-hmm.
this is currently typed to return a promise of an array of strings,
Right.
but that's just not what we that's missing the purpose of having that type at all.
I
If we're going to
agree.
use it, this thing should be returning a promise of an array of GitHub team members or whatever they're called. So
Absolutely.
it'll be available in this, like the only team members floating around in this file, which is this function, which is the core of the program, will be of those types.
Yeah.
So to me, it would make sense to declare them in here as well, and then have anything that needs to provide for this function, like a GitHub client, be looking inward towards this to get those types. Like, oh, I need to serve you with a get members of what are the return types you expect.
Well,
Um,
let me try
but
something.
it's different. What's different here is that the GitHub client is no longer a like. So maybe this is a move we need to make first for my benefit, and we really need to do a Git commit. We need to delete this because this GitHub client thing is no longer something that we need because we only have one GitHub client at play anymore.
Yes.
And I think it'll help me if we can get rid of that. And there's a lot of baggage that just doesn't need to be here anymore.
And that's what I mean by kind of the lack of dogmatism. And again, I don't mean that in a pejorative way, but when you're doing it's sort of the classic way of doing a fake is to you do the
Mm.
interface and then you do the real thing and then you do the fake. And I've seen a lot of code bases where every single class has an interface associated with it. And so
Yeah,
you
well, yeah, I GitHub client, right?
yeah, yeah. So everything you do end up with
Yeah,
three files.
yeah.
And this collapses all that down. You really only have the thing that you have, and it's the real thing, it's the only thing, that's the thing. Um, so I would let's go ahead and commit, like you said. And then what I'm thinking is that since Octokit GitHub is the GitHub adapter, it defines the types that it uses and expects. We export those types and and turn them from strings to being actual types.
Look, I fixed my commit message thing, so it's got your co-authored by in it, and we can both edit the commit message in VS Code. Isn't that nice?
Ah!
I repaired that bit of my tooling over the last week because it was annoying me that it wasn't working.
Am I
So what
typing in
did
the
we
commit
do?
message here?
Well, we can both type together.
All right. Um, so what do
What
we
did we
do?
do?
We introduced introduce proper types into Octokit GitHub. That's how I see it. Anything to add to that?
No, it's good.
Okay.
I'm just
And,
writing down all the things we didn't do yet on my
yeah.
card.
I don't know how to make this go, so you'll have to press
Save it
do
and
the
close
save
it, I
and
think.
go thing.
Save it and close it. I think that should do it. Yeah.
So what I'm thinking is because we do still have code that depends on GitHub client, the interface, right? I do think that ultimately when we're done, we'll be able to delete GitHub client interface. We'll be able to delete the GitHub fake. It's going to be glorious because I love deleting
It's like
code.
something we're gonna do on the towards the bottom of the downhill though, isn't it?
Yeah,
We haven't got to that bit yet.
yeah,
It's like the finish line when we go through going, yay.
yeah, yeah. But what I think we can do, because GitHub client has got all these strings declared,
Yeah.
we do things like say that this is a GitHub
Yeah, if we
username?
move the things like I said. So I think if you'll humor me, I think if we just move these two, so let's do it here.
Okay,
Let's
hold
move
on. I need
these
to find
two.
you. Go
Are
ahead.
you with me?
Mm-hmm.
So take these two and move them into the core here, and then we change the type to say this should be a GitHub username, for example. And then
Mm-hmm.
when we go back to the Octokit implementation, it should be complaining. Oh, why is it not telling us that that's wrong? Hold on, I've got a bunch of problems. Have you got a bunch of problems? I need to export.
See, to me, that feels backwards. It feels like we should be exporting it from Octokit GitHub, not from retiring active contributors. I'm okay with retiring active contributors being aware of Octokit GitHub, but I don't feel like Octokit GitHub should be aware of retiring active contributors.
Well, but what's the point in there being an Octokit GitHub if it isn't to serve the retiring active contributors function? Like that's the whole reason we're here. So the this looking inward thing, which you've referred to as dogmatic, it really helps me think about dependencies in a program. To think about um, look at this idea of looking inward towards what's the kind of most important behavior. And the only reason Octokit GitHub even has to exist is because we need to be able to retire inactive contributors. So that's the kind of heart of the program.
Well, so
And then
this is
that thing
interesting because
defines the things that it needs,
uh,
and then we're sort of building the things based on those needs.
so I've always said that I don't truly understand the hexagonal architecture, and this I think is one of those things that I don't really understand. Um, so I agree with you. So when I think about um, so retire interactive contributors is our app, right? It's our application. It's sort of our thing
Well,
that does
not
stuff.
in the yeah, not in the sense of the way some people would use app. Like I think in your A-frame architecture, it's more the logic.
No, it's not. It's definitely not the logic. Not in the A-frame architecture sense.
But if this isn't the logic, what is like this bit here where it says if no one's committed since a certain date, then add them to the team and remove them to the team. Like
Well, that's what I meant by lack of dogmatism. It wasn't really just trying to, I was not trying to say hexagonal architecture is dogmatic. What I'm saying is that A-frame architecture is not. And the fact is there is not enough logic in this program for there to be any logic. Like, what's the logic? There ain't none. It's just an
Well,
app.
there's one business rule. The one business rule is if they haven't committed since a certain date, then take them from one team and move them into the other. So it's
Exactly. And that's
so
not
that's its
interesting enough to
one.
be in a logic layer. Um, that's the lack of dogmatism. It can be in the logic layer, it
Right.
can be in the app layer, and do whatever's simplest. So
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
there's just there's not enough there to pull it out into a separate class.
Yeah. So, so I think maybe what you call dogmatism, I call clarity, because this is a like. There's no doubt that we could have implemented this whole program and solved this whole problem with something that was way simpler. It was a single file that called Octokit directly. It didn't have any tests. We just tested it by pushing it up to GitHub and running it and seeing if it worked.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so there's this sort of like, there's that spectrum of like how engineered do you want this thing to be? And partly the reason that this is so engineered is just because it's got enough in it to be complicated enough that we could sort of make it an exemplar for how to layer things like this that were more complicated problems. This is always the problem I find with like teaching examples is
Mm-hmm.
if they're complicated enough to that you would realistically want to make the engineering trade-offs, they're also probably so complicated that people couldn't get their heads around them and learn from them.
Yeah.
So you kind of always have to suspend that question about like would this actually justify the amount of engineering that's gone into it. I find um, otherwise you end up with very complicated examples that are difficult to understand. So you
Well,
could sort of say if this were doing a load more stuff, this is the place where you would put that more stuff. And there are plans for it to do other things as well, like
so
um
let's come back to the dependencies question. So I agree with
mm,
you, and my comments were not based on this being a teaching example. I didn't realize that that's what you were trying to do here. So yeah, if this was a teaching example, yes, there would be logic. But the fundamental rule of A-frame architecture is that logic never ever depends on infrastructure. Um, you've got an app which coordinates infrastructure and logic, and you've got logic which is purely calculations. It has no awareness of the outside world. So as this is written right now, there is no logic layer. We could introduce one as a teaching thing, but right now,
but there's right. So in your definition of logic, so the business rule that somebody should be retired into a different team if they haven't committed since a certain date, that would live in your application box.
no,
The implementation of that business rule.
no. Um, the business rule implementation, when you need it, which is you don't always do, um, but if you have any significant program, typically you're going to have business rules. Um, your business rule implementation lives in the logic layer. The
Right.
communication with the outside world lives in the infrastructure layer, and the app layer is responsible for coordinating between the two of them.
So if we factored this into so if this was the application layer in the
Mm-hmm.
A-frame,
Mm-hmm.
where would this implementation of the rule that somebody should be moved into from one team to another if they haven't committed since a certain date?
I
If you're
can do
saying
that right now.
that doesn't belong
So I'm going to
in the
implement the logic.
application, how
I'm
does
going to
it how
I'm
does
going to
it
implement your logic layer. Um, because you've put some of your logic in the infrastructure, it doesn't make a lot of sense here. The
what's the
has
logic
committed
that's in the
sense is the
infrastructure?
is the rule. Um, if you wanted to make this have a proper logic layer, you'd probably say GitHub.last committed, and then you'd say should move um, should move user,
Not
and
where
then
are
you'd
you
say
typing? Okay.
uh, last committed date or last committed and today, and then we return uh, last
Right.
committed is less than today minus 1 year.
Right.
That's the logic
Yeah.
layer.
So you'd have that pure. Yeah, I see. And
Yeah,
then the knowledge of what you do in order to move the user would be in the infrastructure, in the application layer.
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. Or you might have in the infrastructure layer, you might have GitHub dot move user from, user from team to team.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and if you did that, then the code would be for each, for author of team members. This is what your application layer would look like. Last committed equals GitHub dot get last committed author. If should move user last committed today. GitHub dot move user.
Yeah. So I see what you're describing here, and this to me is beyond where I want to go. I'm
I mean, that's if we were to do sort
it's
of the purest A-frame
yeah,
architecture, but you know, I think the code you have is fine. That's what I mean it by it not being dogmatic. It's fine. What you got is 5 lines of code. It doesn't need a whole
but
bunch
it
of
is
layers. It's good enough.
interesting. It's interesting, this idea of you've still got an abstraction on the GitHub, like you're yeah. I wanna kind of like live in a code base that does loads of stuff that's designed like this and see what I think about it.
Mhm.
Um, because this is really different to how I think about designing things around um yeah, hexagons and things depending inwards. So it's just really different.
Yeah, the dependencies here are from app depends on infrastructure, which in this case is GitHub client, Octokit GitHub, and app depends on logic. And neither infrastructure and logic are completely unaware of each other.
Yeah, so your logic is a lot more sort of thin or simple. So,
I mean,
but
it's not
your
necessary. I
infrastructure
mean,
isn't
logic can be
necessarily
complicated depending on
yeah,
how
yeah, what it's
complicated the
got to
logic is.
do, but it doesn't know about those external interaction points. That's the like key difference.
That is the
So
key.
I think about the logic living inside this box, and there are these doorways marked like GitHub or logging or persistence or whatever, and the logic kind of sometimes has to go up to those doorways and go, and shout through them and go, hey, are there any users in this team? Or, hey, would you mind storing this thing for me? But it doesn't know that those doorways exist. And that's kind of how I think about writing that logic is that it stays inside that room, but it knows that there are those doorways. And that's kind of, it understands how it exists in the world and how it interacts with the world. So that's kind of how I think about designing my logic. Whereas um, I think that's kind of what the application layer is for you, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because you would still create abstractions around those doorways. So when you talk about infrastructure there in that diagram,
Hmm.
that's not Octokit. That's still you would put an abstraction around Octokit to make it simpler for your application
That's
code.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's where my adapters go, is in the infrastructure layer. And then my domain logic, which if it's complicated, is going to be a complete domain model with all the classes interacting with each other. That goes in logic. But the key idea here is that logic is absolutely pure. It has no side effects. It could be implemented purely functionally if that's what you chose to do. It could be implemented object oriented. Gary Bernhardt calls this functional core imperative shell, and that's a very
Yeah.
similar idea. And designing your code to work this way does require you to basically turn it inside out, because in a traditional approach where logic is aware of those doorways, um, your flow of control goes incoming, logic, outgoing. But in the A-frame architecture, the flow of control is uh, application to infrastructure to application to logic to application to infrastructure to application to logic. And so you have to program your logic so that everything it does, anything that could cause any side effects whatsoever, is a return value that is responded to by the application layer. And for some
There's a
things,
there's
that's
a
really difficult.
there's a guy called Ted Young that I've talked to quite a bit about hexagonal architecture, and he thinks about there being another layer that he calls application layer that sort of sits above the inner hexagon, so outside of that room,
Mm-hmm.
that's the thing that is sending jobs into that room.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's, yeah. There's another exercise that we need to do as a I feel like we need to bring other people into this discussion
Mm-hmm.
and do something other than working on this code base to kind of get these patterns a bit more clarified for each other, and understand where the trade-offs are between them, I think.
Yeah. Well, I do have, I've got a couple of examples. One I'm working on now, which is heavily domain driven and has a very, very thin infrastructure thing. Um, so it does a lot of logic. It's a stock market thing. Um, and then I have one that's very heavy infrastructure and does very little logic. And that's already up. It's on my
Mm.
website at jamesshore.com/s/LNL. And it's that is basically a little microservice architecture. It has a web server, it has a service, which is also a web server, and the logic is really nothing more than a route 13 thing. It's like 5 lines of code. But all this stuff around doing HTTP requests and timeouts and so forth. Um, so I have both of those examples, which we could use at some point if it was helpful.
Yeah, I think it would be. I think we need to decide what we do with this code base right now,
Right.
because I'm personally not I'm not inclined to want to explore moving it towards A-frame right now,
Mm-hmm.
mainly because I've got the itch because it's not working yet. We haven't got all of the tests like I want to do the thing of making the configuration be malleable
Mm-hmm.
first. Um, and
So,
then I'd be interested in going on a side quest to see what this looked like in A-frame style instead, or like you just sketched out. Although maybe it doesn't do enough yet for that to be interesting.
well, let's,
Um,
I agree with you. Let's finish what we've got. Um, and in sort of my perception of the world, GitHub team name is something that only that you could say that that's just sort of a general type that the entire system is aware of, and I would be okay with that. Um, or we could say, well, that's just a property of Octokit GitHub, and um, only people who talk to Octokit GitHub need to know what a team name is. I think either is fine. So,
yeah.
but what I don't love is having, but if we're going to do that, I'd want to make a types file or something like that that Octokit
Mm.
GitHub could depend on, and Reactive contributors could depend on, because I don't want my low level infrastructure, which is Octokit GitHub, depending on my high level or higher level code, which is retiring active contributors.
Yeah, and that is where you and I are definitely like opposed,
Interesting.
because I do because I think the only point of the infrastructure being there is so that it can serve the retiring active
Oh no,
contributors
we're on the same
function.
page with that. It's just that in my mindset, something that exists entirely for the purpose of something else is unaware of that something else. The dependency arrow goes from the user to the usee, not the other way around.
Yeah, I don't know if I agree with that. So the thing should be unaware of how it's being used.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, the thing is, if these two were in their own file, they're just, both of them are depending on it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it could go either way.
Yeah.
So that we don't need to force it to go one way or the other.
Well, that's why I would put it in its own file.
Depend on, as a famous clean coder once said, depend on abstractions, not on concrete implementations, and that's kind of what we're talking about doing here, right?
Yeah. I don't agree with
Um,
that statement. Depend on
you
abstractions
know,
rather than concrete implementations. But that is the kind of thing we're
well,
talking about.
but
I mean,
leaning the dependencies towards a more abstract thing, I suppose. So that's what we're doing here. Is like we're pointing both of them at this thing, which is the abstraction.
yeah. Yeah. And to be clear, the only reason we're talking about this, or the only reason I'm harping on this, is because I think it's interesting
Mm.
design distinction. But there isn't. I don't feel like there needs to be a right answer here. If you wanted to depend on retiring active contributors, it's not the end of the world.
What I really want to do is delete this,
Yeah.
and I don't massively care where these two end up. But definitely, my inclination is to put it in here and have everything point inwards towards it.
Yeah.
But really, but I'm yeah, that isn't even quite right. Like if it was all separate packages, yeah, it's just this is still just new to me because we don't have a port anymore.
Mhm.
So really, strictly speaking, in dependency terms, if this thing is the core and then there's the infrastructure, they would both be depending on the port. And neither of them would know about each other. They would just know about the port. And then some bigger assembly application thing would know about all of them and be able to piece them all together. So that's it's just that they happen to be lumped into the same file here right now. So this is the port and it's sitting in the same
Right.
file.
Well,
But yeah.
uh, let's just make this so we're past our 90 minutes. I can keep going if you want. Um, it'd be nice to finish off the type work. Uh, and I don't think we can get rid of that interface yet because we have tests that are using it.
Mm.
So
But we could go through and do this thing of changing the to have usernames and
exactly, that's what I was
stuff.
thinking.
Get
Let's
rid of the
just change the
primitives.
strings to being types and
Yeah.
then we'll call it a day.
So if I do terminal run build task npm, maybe tsc watch, will that work? I think it might work. So if I change one of these to be a, does that give me any problems? It doesn't give me any problems. That seems, do you think that's surprising? Maybe it's not. Yeah, because if we go in here, won't the, we change remove user from team to have a user that's GitHub username and a committers team that's a GitHub team name. So remove user from team should expect those to be. I'm surprised that it's letting us use primitives here on line 61 and not throwing up an error.
Hmm. Yeah.
And is that because I haven't compiled things properly or because I've misunderstood how TypeScript works?
I mean, up until now, it's been really good about giving us errors as soon as they show up. Isn't it not? Is it not just
Mm,
recognizing that those are compatible types?
that's what I'm wondering. So you could just as well use a string.
I mean, it's probably coercing, right?
I don't know. I'm still surprised. I'm still surprised that we can't force it to have to be. Yeah, it happens to be a string right now, but we've said that it has to be one of those. I'm surprised it isn't forcing us to do that.
Well, let's just go through and change them over, and if it compiles, then we're because we don't need it to be
Yeah.
both. We're going to switch them all over anyway,
So
so we
what
might
would
as
they all
well.
be then? So author is a username.
Yeah.
User is a username.
Hmm.
Team would be a team name. And then that returns usernames.
Yeah.
And I'm going to npm run build again. Still not complaining about anything.
Let me try something. Um, so I'm going to go to
No, there's
Octokit GitHub.
something not right here because when I look at the if I hover over the get members of, it still tells me that the types are primitives.
Let me try something. If I
Yeah,
go into has committed since line 31 on Octokit
I'm
GitHub,
following you.
and if I say that that is a GitHub team name, that should give us an error, and it does.
Well, no, that's only because you're formatting.
Oh, yeah. So that should be illegal because author is not a
Yeah,
GitHub team name. It's supposed
something's
to be
not
a
right.
username.
Something's not right.
Yeah, that should be a username. And now it's saying it doesn't. Oh, that's just because of the N. Huh. Yeah, there's something weird there.
I'm really yeah. I'm sort of at the point where I want to like reboot things because like I've got the interface defined just up here, and then right down here where we're using it, it's telling us like if I did class foo implements GitHub client, and then implement interface GitHub client. Yeah, look, it's making it with the. So is it defined somewhere else? What the hell is going on?
That's weird. Yeah.
It's like it just hasn't listened. Is it because I've just used equals? I really thought you could do that and make it be a new type. Maybe that's where I'm going wrong is this thing.
Hmm. Is there another way to declare a type? Is it colon string, perhaps?
No, I don't think so. Okay, I think we should just abandon this little move for it right now. I'll have a fiddle around on my own and remember what's going on because it's just I'm just not I'm failing us here
Yeah.
with my TypeScript knowledge.
Well, let's do this much. I think we're on, as long as it continues to compile. I don't know why it's not giving us proper error messages, but let's at least go through
That's
and
true. Yeah, we can leave
finish
it.
finish this. So I'm going to do that on here. We got this, got this. Let's see, and then we need a team name. and there, and there. I do love how well static types document things. Um, okay, and it did not like, now I'm getting an error message. Replace
Is that
user
just
GitHub
that's
name.
just formatting?
Oh, that's all it is. It keeps throwing me that your formatting issues are coming out as as
I know.
compile errors. Um, okay, so I think that's it for the types. There's something going on where it thinks the types are primitives, but at least we've got the documentation capability of it.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else on your list that's relevant to the types?
No, I've just written that down on the primitives thing. The the two other things that I'd written down were, do you remember you mentioned using set immediate so that we really behaved in a promisey way?
I think that's more work, unless we want to spend another hour on this. I think that's
Yeah.
something for another time.
And the other thing that I have is declaring a factory for, so, and again, this is something we can do another time, but it would be to make the constructor of Octokit GitHub private, or
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah, private, and then have a factory that actually constructs an instance of the Octokit library. So all of that typing's contained in this file rather than having callers have to know about where to get an Octokit from.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a good thing to do, but that's also a fairly big thing as well.
I'm not going to do them in the next few minutes.
No. Here's what I would suggest is our next steps. I think we need to finally change the tests. So I think we've got Octokit GitHub as good as it needs to be right now. Change the tests, get it working in sort of the unit test way and then in the Cucumber way. And then uh, make the factory, erase the fake, simplify everything down so we've got a nice example of using nullable infrastructure as it's meant to be done. And then maybe after that, we move to a full A-frame architecture just as a to see what the differences is. Because right now, what we're going to end up with, we're going to end up with something that's got nullable infrastructure wrappers and sort of a port and adapters pattern, except it's no ports because there won't be necessary. So I think it could be interesting, although I don't think you have to use A-frame architecture with nullable infrastructure wrappers. I think it'd be interesting to go sort of the whole way and see what a
Yeah, what
A-frame
difference it
architecture
would
approach
make.
would look
Yeah,
like.
yeah, yeah. Yes, that sounds like a plan.
Okay.
So next week we're going to tackle the cucumber tests.
I think we want to finish the retire inactive contributors test just to see it work. As
True, yeah, because it's still actually Skippy, isn't it?
yeah, we'll
We're
we'll
not actually
finish
using
that,
it.
just see that this works, and then
Yeah,
I think we'll spend the majority of the time on the cucumber,
but
which I
this
don't
will also
expect to be
make
too
an
hard.
easier place to work through the stuff to make the configuration malleable just out of this unit test. We can sort of drop down to this when we need it.
Yeah, yeah. If we start
Yeah.
here and we sort of figure out how to make it work, then when we go into cucumber, because there's uh more abstractions there,
Mm.
we'll get it all working here and then just bam it into the step
Yeah.
definitions.
Yeah. Inside out.
Yeah, yeah.
Fascinating.
All
Right.
right.
Thanks, James. This has been really interesting. We've gone on a bit too long today, haven't we? It's almost 2 hours of
Yeah.
recording.
Well, it's hard to do much of interest in just an hour, isn't it?
Yeah.
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 So yeah, thanks very much. I'm having a blast. I don't know if we had any viewers today. I don't know if everybody's watching YouTube, but if you are, thanks for coming along. And do you want to stop the recording in the stream?
I will. Bye, everyone.